So, Lulu, are you having fun with our fanfics?
No,
Are you excited to read about Gnomeo and Juliet?
sure.
Do you want to read any of the BTS ones I linked?
I I don't know anymore.
Non-Sexual Omorashi Scat One-Shots. Let's read. Chapter 2, Umbridge doesn't allow bathroom breaks during detention. Harry was deeply regretting that he hadn't been able to hold off his temper when in Umbridge's class. He didn't regret telling the truth, not at all, but these detentions were torture. As if spending hours cutting into the back of his own hand wasn't bad enough, it seemed as if fate really had something against him as he felt his bladder clench uncomfortably.
Huh?
Harry had to admit, though, he kind of brought this on himself. With everything that's been on
Oh,
his mind lately, he had completely forgotten to use the restroom after dinner. And now he was paying the price for his forgetfulness.
oh,
Shall I continue?
it's up to you.
Umbridge's office was completely silent save for the scratching of Harry's quill, the occasional page turn of Umbridge reading a book, and the little shifts Harry made in his seat in a futile effort to get more comfortable. While Harry usually appreciated the silence, as it meant the pink toad that calls herself a teacher wasn't speaking in her sickly sweet and patronizing voice. He currently wished for anything to help distract him from his aching bladder. He had already been in detention for about 4 hours, and it didn't look like Umbridge was planning on letting him go anytime soon, as she was deeply absorbed in her book, which Harry felt a little disgusted to note was a romance novel. Ugh, Umbridge and romance did not go well together at all. Harry squirmed in his seat as he held back the urge to whimper. Damn, he really shouldn't have drank so much pumpkin juice.
Wait,
Uh, but Harry wasn't anything if he wasn't stubborn. So he determinedly, determinedly kept on writing, I must not tell lies, over and over again, not even flinching when the words were continuously etched into the back of his hand. Time seemed to pass extremely slow as Harry wrote line after line on parchment after parchment. In addition to his full bladder, both his cut up hand and his wrist were aching something terrible. Harry tried to avoid looking at the mess that was in his hand. He knew it had to be covered in blood by now, and it had most likely stopped healing itself ages ago. An hour and a half later, Harry was constantly shifting around, trying to resist the urge to grab himself to help ease off the need to piss. He absolutely refused to show that kind of weakness in front of Umbridge, and his pride wouldn't let him do it anyway. He was 15 years old. He should be able to hold it in without grabbing himself like a child. Harry only lasted another 15 minutes before he decided that he had to at least try to ask if he could use the restroom. He wasn't sure how long he'd be able to hold it in if she didn't go soon. Excuse me, Professor? Harry spoke up, trying to sound as polite as possible. Umbridge glanced up from her novel. Yes, Mr. Potter? Is something the matter? Is something the matter? Harry clenched his teeth against the slight anger he felt at her tone, which had an undertone of mocking in it. I was just wondering if I could go to use the loo really quick. It's kind of an emergency. Harry's face flushed in embarrassment as he admitted how badly he needed to go. Umbridge smiled maliciously and said, No, I don't think so, Mr. Potter. You will sit there and write your lines until your detention is over. As you are a teenager, not a toddler, I'm sure you can hold it. She returned to her book, her face looking smug. Harry glared down at his current piece of parchment as his dislike for the horrible woman rose even more. He couldn't believe he was stuck in this situation. It was completely humiliating. He felt a persistent ache coming from his bladder as he resumed writing lines. Every now and then it would throb to the point of becoming a bit painful, and he'd have to stop writing to tense all of his muscles to keep everything in. It was looking less and less likely that he would make it back to the common room completely dry. Harry had lost track of time, writing the same words over and over again, focusing more on his bladder than anything else, his handwriting completely on autopilot as he struggled to hold in all the liquid in his bladder. In fact, he was so focused on his need to piss that he jumped when Umbridge abruptly coughed. Harry froze in place when he felt a small stream of urine escape his body, only to be absorbed by the fabric of his boxers. He quickly reclenched his muscles and nearly hissed from the slight burn that came from him cutting off his body's much-needed relief. He slowly looked up at his professor, his cheeks turning redder than an angry weasel, as he saw her watching him with cruel amusement. Yes, ma'am. Harry internally cursed himself for stuttering. It is midnight, Mr. Potter. Your detention is now over. Hopefully the message has finally sunk in, she smirked, nastily, in smug satisfaction. You may go. Harry almost didn't process that he'd finally been given permission to leave. He was too hung up on the fact that it was midnight, which meant that he had managed to hold it in for another hour and 15 minutes. Harry had to admit, if only to himself, that he was impressed with his ability to hold in his piss. Sure, he had plenty of experience of holding his bladder for long periods of time at the Dursleys when they refused to let him out of his cupboard during punishments. But he had been holding it for a total of 7 hours, and he had only leaked once. Harry thought he deserved a damn medal or something for that achievement. Harry stood up cautiously and grabbed his stuff, trying to move as fast as possible without jolting his bladder. He hurried out of the ugly office and speed walked down the corridor, heading straight towards where he knew the nearest restroom to be, which was unfortunately rather far away considering the urgency of the situation. His bladder was constantly throbbing in pain by that point, and he soon had to slow down and even stop a few times to give his full attention towards clenching his lower muscles as much as possible to prevent any more leaks. Harry was actually worried that he was hurting himself by holding it for so long, but he was determined not to give up. He had to make it to the restroom. He just had to. Harry had given up trying to hold back his sounds of desperation by that point. Here, Lulu, you could do the desperation sounds.
No.
Letting out gas
No.
and loud whimpers
No.
as he made his way down the last corridor, standing between him and relief. He gave his dick the occasional squeeze with his uninjured hand, hoping that it would help him hold back the flood that was waiting to be released. Luckily, no one was around to hear or see him, as Harry didn't think he could handle that level of humiliation on top of everything else happening in his life. As Harry turned the corner at the end of the corridor, he finally caught sight of the restroom, which was just a few feet away from his current position. His bladder clenched, especially painful at the sight, causing tears to well up in Harry's eyes as he hurriedly crossed his legs and tried his hardest to hold everything back. Unfortunately, his bladder seemed to be filled beyond capacity, as a long stream hissed out of him and into his pants. Harry's lapse in control lasted a full 10 seconds before he managed to barely cut off the flow, which made him moan in pain. Lily,
What?
moan in pain. Thank you. His pants now had a wet spot over his crotch and trailing down both of his legs. The brief moment of relief had felt like heaven, and the wet fabric against his dick was making his knee to go even worse, if that was even possible at this point. Harry threw all caution to the wind and just sprinted the rest of the way into the restroom. Unfortunately for Harry, this proved to be his undoing. How are we all doing?
Where am I?
I'm almost done. Can you believe? With this chapter, that is.
This chapter?
He had barely made it through the doors to the restroom when his bladder completely gave out. He froze as urine flowed from his body, soaking his pants and causing a loud hissing sound to reach his ears. He let out a shaky moan of relief.
Poor thing.
Make the moan sound, bitch. And hung his head with his eyes closed, not even trying to hold it anymore. He didn't think he'd be able to stop even if he wanted to. It just felt so good to finally let go. Harry continued peeing a strong stream into his pants for a solid minute before it started to slow down and eventually come to a dribble, until the only sounds in the restroom were the slight drips from urine falling from Harry's saturated pants and into the large yellow puddle at his feet. Harry sighed blissfully. Harry sighed blissfully. Lulu. And opened his eyes, immediately blushing when he saw the mess he had made. Well, at least he had magic on his side to help him clean everything up. And no one else had been around to see his accident either, which Harry was eternally grateful for. As Harry took out his wand to start cleaning, he silently vowed to himself that he would never forget to use the toilet after a meal ever again. And that's the Harry Potter chapter.
Wow.